Welcome to Fair and Square. My guest today is Gurdeep Singh Pall, Global Head Skype and Corporate Vice President, Microsoft. Welcome on Fair and Square, Gurdeep. You've just joined as the Global Head for Skype, which is now part of Microsoft, purchased in 2011 for $8.5 billion. And I've heard yours is a fascinating journey in Microsoft. But before we dwell into that, let's start from your earlier days. I believe you're a Chandigarh boy.
Yes. I was born in Chandigarh and I had a couple of stints here. I was here till the age of 6, then back here for 3 years, from I guess 4th grade to 6th grade.
Where did you study here?
At St. John's School.
And then?
After that, my dad was in the army, so we ended up in Dehradun, and from Dehradun to Calcutta. I did my high school from Calcutta.
And then your further education?
Then I went to Birla Institute of Technology. I got my computer engineering degree there. And then when I went to the US to get my master's in computer and information sciences from University of Oregon.
But I've heard that you cleared your NDA exam at some point.
Yes.
So why didn't you go to the army then? What got you here?
That was an interesting decision. I was still in 12th grade, and my father, of course, was a brigadier in the army, and he was very excited about the fact that I was going to join the army. And then about 3-4 weeks before I was supposed to join, I told him, I really disappointed him. And I told him that, it's a little early for me to commit to this path right now. And I really would like to explore some other options. And with that, I sort of went the engineering route and never looked back.
So you completed your post-graduation in which year then?
In 1989, I graduated with a master's degree from University of Oregon.
And then you joined Microsoft?
That's right. Before I graduated, I had a job offer from Microsoft, and I joined in January of 1990.
And how did it all begin your journey then in Microsoft?
It's been a fascinating journey. Back in 1990, basically the personal computer was just about taking off, and that was opening up so many possibilities. And I was very lucky. I got to work on some really interesting technologies. The first major project that I worked on was something called remote access service, which allowed people to connect their computers over a phone line with modems. And because they were able to connect, they were able to work from home, which opened up a whole new idea of how computing is done. And that was really, really interesting. I could see the transformation happening in how people work. Even in the early 90s. And then, of course, the big internet happened in the mid-90s.
Before we get on to the internet part of it, your first day in Microsoft, your first step, how was the feeling?
It was very exhilarating. I still remember the day. It was January 8, 1990, and Seattle gets pretty cold. It was foggy and very, very cold. And I was there, sort of, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I showed up for work, and the place was electric. So many smart people, so committed to what they were doing, working so hard. It was just incredible to be part of that. You
mentioned about the internet, and I believe that you've been part of building the blocks. How did this whole internet story unfold in terms of the critical mass it gained and so on and so forth?
It's really fascinating. Of course, the internet originally was funded as a defense project. And it developed in its early days, first inside some universities, and then a lot of the universities were connected. And all that happened. By the time 1990, 91, 92 came along, this really was just an academic network. And then, there were a few things that happened right, which basically allowed the internet to suddenly explode. One of them was the standardization of this TCP/IP protocol, which is the protocol on which the entire internet works. The other protocols sort of fell behind. This sort of got momentum. Windows 95 shipped with the TCP/IP
I believe
stack.
you were part of the team that created Windows 95?
That is correct. I worked on Windows operating systems in the early 90s and all the way through 2001, actually, to Windows XP. And I worked on the TCP/IP protocol, I worked on other connectivity pieces. And then Windows 95 became extremely popular, became one of the most widely adopted.
It's the tipping point of the whole internet.
That's right.
Gaining critical mass.
That's right. And the fact that came with the building the connectivity for the internet right in the operating system, that pretty much was one of the things which caused the tipping point of the internet. And then, of course, the World Wide Web, which was starting off in 94 and 95. And then, of course, it's been not even 20 years and the world has completely transformed. I don't think ever before in the history of mankind such a huge transformation has happened in such a short time.
Bill Gates is a name that we really associate with change. When did you first get to meet Bill Gates?
My first meeting with Bill, I would see him around a lot because he was heavily involved. But my first presentation to him was in 1996. And it was, again, about networking. And I remember I was just, very excited as well as also scared, because Bill was known to be, he's very, very deep technically, and he's very precise about his questions and so on. And I distinctly remember that day. It was great.
What was the feeling like?
It was really just exhilaration as well as, really feeling scared about, oh, I hope I don't screw up.
So you've been with Microsoft for almost 25 years now, 24 years?
Yes.
You must have met Bill many, many times over. So share some anecdotes.
Incredible man. I feel extremely fortunate to having worked with him for many, many years and worked quite closely with him. He's one of the few people in the world, and there's really just a handful, if you really think about, whether you think about the software industry or even broader, who has technology, business, and strategy. All those three things, he's got it right, and he's got it figured out. And anybody who can actually operate across those three dimensions has incredible impact, and that's what Bill had. He, just working with him, most of my engagement with him was on technology and on strategy, and just extremely deep. And the thing about him is that, he has no ego. The richest man in the world, probably one of the most powerful people in technology, has no ego. He will debate you purely on the merit of the idea. And I've been in many discussions with him where, he expects you to engage with him as a peer and let the best idea win. Of course, many times he's right because he has such a big, broad perspective, but there were times when, I was able to correct him and it was just fine. It was totally fine. He actually respected you more for that. Incredible man.
Any particular anecdote or example you recall?
We had so many discussions. Typically the way discussions would happen is we would discuss some approaches in technology. And when we discussed those approaches, from a technological perspective, it was indistinguishable that which idea would win. Then we would actually switch over to strategy and then have a discussion that, well, if we take this technological approach, how do we expect the industry to play out? Or how do we expect other economic factors to play out? And those are the places where Bill really, really shone. And he said, yeah, this is a better idea technically, but because you do not create opportunity for other partners in the industry, this idea will not get momentum. This other idea will get momentum, even though it may be slightly inferior on its own merit. But because it enables opportunities for others, it's going to get momentum. So this is the kind of insight that Bill would bring, which is truly tremendous.
Steve Jobs is the other name, big name in the IT world. But I just want to understand in the sense that if Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were never born in this world, what sort of a world would we have existed in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, there are some secular trends in the industry, which are immutable. They will happen, and regardless of whether certain people are there or not. The fact there was miniaturization of transistor, which resulted in, more and more powerful processors, and that's why you're carrying a supercomputer in your pocket. A supercomputer from 30 years ago is in everybody's pocket. Those are immutable trends. But I think that if Bill Gates and Steve Jobs hadn't been around, these things would have taken a lot longer to converge, because you end up with lots of fragmented solutions, each competing amongst themselves, and there's inefficiency. So because there are these powerful people who have vision, they're able to bring together and drive consolidation, and quickly, you get 80–90% sort of products. And that makes the industry very efficient. So I think they really sort of accelerated how technology started impacting everybody's lives.
While we draw all these similarities, but there must be basic differences also between Microsoft and Apple, which is actually debated, and now Google in the fray.
Yes.
So how would you put this in perspective? the Microsoft angle and the Apple angle and where Google is headed?
You know, they are, I would say all these are great companies. And, you know, I would say particularly if you look at Apple and Microsoft, you know, we know that these companies have existed for 30 plus years. And, you know, that's a test of time. Google is still relatively new as a company. But the fact that, you know, these companies have, you know, all three of them are very strong. They all share one common thing, and that is the strong belief in technology, the transformative power of technology, the power of technology. So, you know, I think these companies have a common value system around that. Once you get past that, I think they all have very different sort of approaches. If you look at Apple, Apple is a very product-oriented company, you know, and then so people associate, you know, high design with Apple, and they really think through the product, and you know, that's their angle. Microsoft is a very, very technology-oriented company. So, you know, this is a company where, you know, we focus a lot of technology and say, how can this technology be used to create products, as opposed to I want to create a product, and, you know, what technology should I use? So, you know, sort of a nuanced point, and that's what Microsoft is about. Google is really a cloud company and a search company, and I think for them everything is about the cloud and about search technologies.
But vis-a-vis Apple, you know, we don't see Microsoft really getting into tablets, and Apple has launched this mega program for educational apps, which is becoming very popular. So why is Microsoft not in this area?
Well, with Windows 8 and Windows 8.1, we have tablets. We have some Surface is one of the tablets which Microsoft builds the hardware as well. And we also have lots of, you see lots of these are coming out in the industry right now. In fact, the Christmas season has been huge for Windows 8.1 for tablets. The idea of a tablet was actually, Microsoft launched its first tablet in 2001. It was called for pen computing, and the idea that you can use a pen to input on the device. Now that particular device was very powerful, but it turns out that the multi-touch and hand-based touch with the iPad brought about, you know, got more momentum. So now, you know, Microsoft has similar products, and you know, they expect to compete with Apple, and the early results are actually very good. From an education perspective, we see traction on Apple devices, but we also see a lot of traction on Microsoft devices for education around the world. And I think this is going to be a very interesting area as education itself transforms, how technology comes in, and how players like Apple and Microsoft, you know, play a role in that.
With Steve Jobs gone, what is the view on technology and Apple now? Maybe a Microsoft perspective also.
Well, I'll share my perspective, maybe not Microsoft perspective. You know, being close to the industry, I get to see that. You know, people like Steve Jobs are really hard to replace. It is, you know, having worked with, you know, Bill Gates and having worked with people who have such tremendous, you know, insight, it's very hard to replace. And I think that Apple will, I suspect they're already feeling the absence of Steve Jobs, and I think they will feel that more over time. The question is, can they have other leaders step up and really fill the void? And, you know, my personal view is that's very hard to do.
Your job role changed, and you got into real-time communication. In fact, you were spearheading a technical team when Skype was being acquired.
Yes.
How did this journey start?
It's a fascinating journey. So 2001, I was the general manager for Windows networking, and we shipped Windows XP. It's funny, I was just thinking about it. That's the first time when Wi-Fi shipped in an operating system. So my team sort of built that whole stack for the first time, and Wi-Fi didn't exist. And we had to solve so many technical problems. So when we were done with that, this was late 2001, you know, I had a conversation with my manager and said, I've been doing networking for about 11 years. I want to do something different now. So at that time, Bill Gates was really trying to push forward the idea of real-time communications. That means, you know, on your computer, you can have audio and video conversations. And for Bill, it was really coming from the point of view of, it is now possible. That technology, the speed of networks, the speed of computer processors are now such that you can enable audio and video processing. So he put a lot of energy on this area, and they asked me to come and lead this area for Microsoft, and we assembled a few teams, and early 2002, I started working on real-time communications.
And then you acquired Skype in 2011.
Yes, 2011. So we basically on real-time communications, and we built an enterprise communications solution called Link. It is actually the #1 enterprise communication solution for audio, video, instant messaging presence, which is used inside enterprise around the world. But on the consumer side, which is where Skype is really popular for everyday users, not enterprise users, we really didn't have a solution, and that's why I was a big proponent on the acquisition of Skype, and I led the technical side of the acquisition of Skype in 2011.
How has Skype changed the world? I mean, what are the dimensions to this real-time communication?
Incredible. The idea of Skype, when Skype was founded, it was founded around the idea that there was a lot of inefficiency in the world in the area of telecommunications, particularly long-distance communications. If you remember, the cost of long-distance calling was just incredibly high, and most of it was either they were monopolies, these telecoms carriers who were owned by governments, and they had complete monopoly on the different countries, so they could set the price. So that's the context in which Skype started, and they said, you know what, using the internet, we will allow people to call across one country to the other without paying any money. And that was really the core idea of Skype. So it suddenly became this power in communications. In fact, we recently announced that 1/3 of all long-distance calling in the world happens on Skype today.
Wow. But in terms of people-to-people connect, there must be stories and stories coming out that Skype is just helping and changing relationships.
Yeah. Skype is such an incredible product. Ever since I've started, I've taken it over and I'm running it now. Wherever I go, people tell me a personal story about Skype. There are stories about how, for example, in the Iraq War, how the troops are communicating with their families. There's stories about how people are learning how to play music over Skype, how people are learning how to do math, how people have scheduled times once a week where the grandchildren and grandparents who are living in different continents actually set up Skype calls. There's just so many stories.
So about how many subscribers does Skype have?
Hundreds of millions, 300 million plus users, active users on Skype.
But you were talking about 1/3 calls are made on Skype. Why can't I call from India?
Well, so one of the things we do, and we really work with all the countries and whatever the rules and regulations there are, and India has its own rules and regulations about telecom, and you can use Skype. There are some restrictions on how the calls from Skype can be terminated onto the old phone networks, the PSTN networks, and India has a set of regulations around that, as do many countries.
You were also involved in developing artificial intelligence. Bing was part of your work profile, the creation of Bill, the search engine. In layman terms, what exactly does artificial intelligence mean?
The whole idea of artificial intelligence is how can a computer be intelligent like a human being? And so the artificial intelligence, given that computer is not inherently intelligent, what kind of software, what kind of approaches do you take to give it that intelligence? It's a very, very fascinating field. It's about a 40-year-old field, but it's been one of the hardest problems in computer science is how do you...
For example?
For example, having a computer understand natural language. So me telling the computer, remind me to pick up this thing from the store when I leave from home, as a sentence. When I say it to you, you will understand it very easily because the human mind is actually very, very sophisticated. But for a computer to understand just that sentence is a very hard problem. Or for a computer to look at something and recognize, oh, this is a cup, oh, this is a car. It's a very, very hard thing for a computer to do. So the ability of how computers can do that is really what artificial intelligence is about.
So what all role are they going to perform in our lives?
This is where I say, really put on your seat belts and get ready for a ride. The next decade of transformation in computer science is going to come through artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is an area which is probably the most of investment in the industry with the leading companies, including Microsoft, of course, is happening right now. And it is going to change everything. Number one indicator of what it's going to change is this. See, today, we believe that, look, the human is smarter. So we get the human to learn how a computer works. And that's how they communicate, right? Because the human is smarter. We're getting to the place where the computer is going to be smart enough to understand natural interaction from human beings. So, instead of you going and saying, send mail, here's click on the mail button, type in the name of the person, and then you fill in that form. Literally, that's how you send email today. You could literally tell your computer, let Joe know that I'll be running 5 minutes late and he should order coffee for me. And basically, using this utterance, the computer can now figure out, oh, you need to send Joe should be informed using an email, and this is the subject line, and this is the who's Joe, by the way, and then this is the subject of the communication. Very simple. So you'll be interacting with the computer in natural language as opposed to typing in letters inside boxes and clicking on little things.
There's a lot of talk about body apps. What exactly are these body apps?
The promise of wearable computing is actually very, very powerful. And we are starting to see it emerge particularly in healthcare applications, where you can have your pulse, your heart rate, the amount of movement you're doing in a day. All that can automatically be recorded. But we are really starting on an era where a lot of wearable computing is going to become part of our lives. And think of it as all these sensors that are all around you. And then these are all contributing that information, sampling it, putting it out, and then you can have these systems, which are again artificial intelligence systems, which are now trying to figure out a whole bunch of stuff about you, and then proactively recommending you things.
It's time to send the brain on a vacation.
Let's just say that your brain will be free to do other things, and hopefully really focus on some other more important things as opposed to a lot of day-to-day things. Human beings are very, very smart, but they also have just these very, very common patterns where they fail as well. For example, the smartest people will forget to turn off the stove. The smarter people will not turn on the light or will not lock the door. So these kind of things, computers can do really, really well and regularly. And so that burden will just go away from you.
What is the impact of the social media in a world like ours today?
One of the most amazing, fascinating inventions to me has been really, frankly, Facebook represents, and there's others, Twitter and others as well, but Facebook really represents a huge, powerful force. Because earlier, there were these basic hubs of information, and information had to get to a particular point before it could reach out to other people. But now what you have is you have a network, this social network. And this network is basically nothing, it's actually, we like to think of it as like a forest of trees. And you have lots and lots of trees, and each tree has very high connectivity with all the people inside that. So to the extent that you can get any piece of information into a few trees, and you can now get to this network of trees, it gets across. It's a very, very powerful idea, because now things have got decentralized as opposed to being centralized. And that's what we're seeing. It's everything from products to news to ideas. They're just really, really spreading a lot.
We've discussed technology, we've discussed where it's headed, but what do you think is the Indian share here? Is India there?
I think one of the places where India, I wouldn't say just lucked out. I think there's certainly a bit of luck there, but there's also, I think, some of the early investments in universities, especially universities like the IITs, etc., I think really paid off. And when the computer industry really started to take off, India played a very important role in that. So I think if you look at 1990s, India played an incredible role. In 2000s, it's played a pretty strong role as well. But now that where the industry is today, I would say India is one of the players. It's not one of the leading players. It's still producing a lot of computer graduates. The fact that our colonial legacy of English-speaking people has definitely helped a lot, since a lot of the jobs and
so it's the language which is helping, not the education.
So I think it's a combination of those things. However, I see that countries like China, who were really hadn't invested in computer science and had a language gap. In the 90s, they were missing in early parts of 2000s. I see them really, really going fast now. In fact, today, most of the graduate PhD students and people who are finishing their PhDs in computer science in the US are coming from China. So I already see a shift happening.
What is the reason for this?
I think it's really about how some of the other countries have responded. India had a good start, but China because of the emphasis that they've put on computer science, and the government, the way they've created many universities and very high class universities, and they've really funneled lots of money towards computer science, they've managed to actually really accelerate their side. India has sort of continued on the trajectory that it's been on. I will say that, and I would love to see this change if we can effect that change in India, is that we see too many universities giving degrees in computer science. Rather than, quantity is good because you kind of get a nice sort of a broad base, but what you really need are very high class computer science education in universities, and I think emphasizing quality is very important at this time.
I'm going to get more local now.
Okay.
When Microsoft was coming to India, they had also come to Punjab, but they decided to set up shop somewhere else. What does Punjab need to do to attract this kind of IT wealth?
That particular decision was a little bit before. I wasn't very close to it. I heard about the process that they went through at the time of selecting an area where they wanted to, and there was many criteria there. It was about how the government responded to that, access to talent, access to universities. So many factors sort of went into that particular decision. But I think right now, I feel that if Punjab is going to participate in this, in the high tech or the technology sector, it'll take a very big, strong commitment from somebody with a lot of vision. These things are not simple. Pretty much you're competing with almost every other major city, major area in the world. So it's a pretty tough race, and I think it'll take some very strong commitment of growing that muscle on somebody who has a lot of power and has a lot of vision if you're going to get there.
Yours is a very inspiring story. So what sort of advice, would you want to give to youngsters who kind of want to emulate a career like yours, or who want to make it big?
Well, first thing I would say, and I'm sorry to disappoint a lot of people, there are no shortcuts in life. You really have to commit yourself. You have to work hard, and I think you have to have a value system that will actually sustain you in the long term.
How important is education? Because there's this thought going on that to be an entrepreneur, really, education is really not a big deal.
I'm a big believer that education is critical. I think, honestly, without it, I think, it's like buying lottery. And yeah, you'll see some entrepreneurs who, without education or even dropping out of college, can sometimes hit it big. But I think if you had to guarantee success for people, I think a strong education is extremely important.
My last question to you. Obviously, there's a lot of work, and so you must be stressed at times. So what do you do actually to de-stress yourself?
Spending time with my family, I think, is the thing that I do. The time I spend with my kids, with my wife, we'll watch movies, or we'll have friends, and we'll cook and eat and drink together. And I think that's really it's so grounding. And I think just staying connected with your friends and family is a big de-stressor.
Thank you, Gurdeep. Thank you so much for coming here. Wish you all the best.
ਖਬਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਓ, ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਕਿਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਜੁੜੋ। ਆਪਾਂ ਮਿਲਾਂਗੇ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਤੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿਖਾਂਗੇ YouTube ਤੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰੋ Twitter ਤੇ। ਖਬਰਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਰਹੋ ਦਿਨ ਰਾਤ।